Hello and welcome to the Sunday Guardian show by Joyeeta Basu. Today I have on my show Professor Nalapat back. As you know, Professor Madhav Das Nalapat, he is the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian and in fact the ITV network. And when he speaks about China and the US, literally the world sits up and listens. So today what we are going to discuss about, this week in Sunday Guardian, he wrote a very interesting story. It said that US midterm elections give Biden a chance to course correct in Eurasia. Now, what happened after that was that Mr. Biden, when he was in G20, it seems a lot of happiness happened between Xi Jinping and Mr. Biden, much to the surprise of a lot of China watchers and all. So I want to ask Professor Nalapat about what exactly is going on. Are the US and China making up? And at a time, I have read your article, of course, so I know, that is certainly not something that you are talking about. And in terms of when you are saying that Biden should recognize the threat, but it seems Mr. Biden, instead of recognizing China as a threat, has suddenly decided that China is a friend. And especially if we see it in terms of, the joint statement, the statements the respective sides issued, in which, Mr. Biden was going out of his way to please Xi Jinping, and while it seems like Xi Jinping is laying down the rules and saying that you're not going to have any alliances against me, you are not going to try to contain me. So what is going on?
Well, Joyeeta, I'll tell you one thing that is the likely result of what we saw on television, of this interaction between President Biden of the United States and Chinese Communist Party General Secretary Xi Jinping in Bali. And that is that it is going to affect negatively the Democratic Progressive Party in Taiwan, the DPP, which favors a policy which the United States, at least several in the United States, including Department of Defense, they favor, which is that Taiwan should be kept away from the control of China. Now, this is going to really severely affect the confidence of Taiwanese voters as to how reliable the United States is vis-a-vis China, because inside Taiwan, a very significant number of individuals who basically repeat the Chinese line are saying, look, the US is not going to be anywhere around. They will just, egg you on to fight, and at the end of the show, when actual fighting starts, they will just let you down. Look what Joe Biden did in Afghanistan. He cut and ran. He left the Afghan National Army helpless. He left the Ghani government completely helpless. He just cut and ran. Or look, even earlier at what happened to the Kurds after George H.W. Bush had defeated Saddam Hussein and got him out of Kuwait. There was a so-called no-fly zone, etc., etc. But what happened? And then the Kurds were encouraged by the United States to basically revolt against Saddam Hussein. They did so, and Saddam Hussein was allowed to send his planes over and bombard them and kill thousands of them. So this is the message, frankly, about US unreliability, that the Chinese networks, the Russian networks, and the Wahhabi networks are spreading throughout the world, if I may say so. And with the optics of what we saw in the meeting in Bali are definitely not helpful to any country or any government in any country that believes that the United States is a reliable partner in securing its defenses against China. There's no doubt about that. The optics were, I don't know what optics Joe Biden intended. I don't know if frankly, he ever thought about optics at all. But the optics, frankly, are going to go against several staunch US allies. And definitely, I would like to say, it's one of the reasons why, there are other reasons, one of the reasons why Xi Jinping was smiling so broadly and was so confident. I mean, he even ticked off poor Justin Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau,
Yes.
Justin's father, was a person who I think 74. He was the first Canadian Prime Minister, the first senior Western leader after the US people to visit the People's Republic of China. And Justin, poor fellow, has been a good friend of China, a very good friend, what the Chinese call a dear friend. But being a dear friend, you're not supposed to say nasty things about China, even to save your own face, when you probably never said that at all to him. And Xi Jinping said, "You never said all these things to me. How come all this has come in newspaper that you said this and that?" So he had a very broad smile on his face. And part of the reason was the very unfortunate optics of the way in which Joe Biden, essentially Xi Jinping was standing there on the dais, and Biden, poor chap, rushed to meet him. And broad smiles and handshakes and everything. I mean, it's like meeting a long lost friend, a friend you've not seen for a long time. Now, I don't think Biden was briefed on optics at all, but the optics were very, very negative for those who have faith in the US as a counterweight to China.
Obviously the optics were very negative, and the statements particularly that came out, that were frankly astounding. And you see, at the same time, what compels, I mean, given the kind of anger and unhappiness that Biden's own people in the United States have about China, what is compelling, or what is making Joe Biden smile and rush at and try to hug Xi Jinping? What is going on here? Why would he be doing something that could even prove electorally a problem, maybe in 2024 or even otherwise? I mean, he somehow scraped through in the midterms, but it may become a problem for Democratic Party even if he does not stand.
Well, Joe Biden was a negative for the Democrats. Donald Trump was a negative for the Republicans, and the two negatives cancelled each other out. Thank God for both parties, if I may say so. But the fact is, I really don't know why Biden was smiling. He has very little to smile about, frankly, except for the fact that they seem to have got back control of the Senate, and hopefully the senators will acquiesce, for example, in sending an ambassador of the United States to India. No, we are the world's largest democracy. We are the most significant partner of the United States in the Indo-Pacific. And for 2 years, there has not been a US ambassador to India. I mean, this is absurd. And
Yes.
an Indian has to wait 900 days before getting a US visa. A Chinese gets a visa in 9 days or less. I mean, of course, it takes 500 days now to get a European visa, where the Chinese gets it in 5 days. So, you're punishing India for basically not towing your line on Ukraine. China is actually funding this war. China is actually wanting this war to continue. And except to those who refuse to see, it is obvious that Xi Jinping wants this war to continue at least till around April, May of next year. And you are basically rewarding China through granting visas freely to communist Chinese citizens and denying visas, in effect, to citizens of the world's largest democracy. So, frankly, I don't understand Biden's smile at all. I don't understand it. I'm sure there must be somebody who understands it. It's not me. I understand Xi Jinping's broad smile. And that broad smile is the absence of Vladimir Putin on the stage, is basically the very nasty reception that Lavrov got when he came to Bali, the effort to remove Russia from the list of invitees, which Indonesia resisted, and in my view correctly so. Xi Jinping is the biggest gainer from this war. Putin is a loser. Biden is a loser. I mean, we are all losers except for one individual, and that's Xi Jinping. Because now the attention of NATO has gone from Russia back to Russia. We are in Cold War 1.0, 2.0 between the US and its democratic allies and other allies and China. and the Europeans and the Americans have gone back to Cold War 1.0, where the big bad wolf was actually the big bad bear, that is Russia. So it's senseless on their part to have done this. It's senseless on their part to have basically harmed their economies. Specifically, Germany, for example, severely has damaged its economy as a consequence of and who? I want to ask you a simple question. I mean, so many things have been happening where that war is concerned. The Nord Stream pipeline. Who sabotaged the two pipelines? We still don't know. After all this, these so-called democracies, transparent, open, they haven't given the world any glimpse as to what they have come out with, what their findings are, as to who basically punctured that pipeline. You can be sure that if it were the Russians, they would have come out of it immediately. The full data, the full information, the full complicity would have been exposed. So it's obviously not the Russians. Otherwise, we would have got to know who is it. And then you have the Bucha killings. Frankly, who are the people who died? Are they Russian-speaking Ukrainians? Russian-speaking individuals who the Ukrainians believe to have been traitors? Or are they Ukrainian-speaking? And are they anti-Russian? Unless you know the identities, unless you know the social media profiles of those who were killed horribly and deliberately in Bucha, you won't know who has killed them. I'm sure that the NATO powers have access to that data. They have access to that browsing data. They know exactly who was killed. Why don't they release it to the world? Why not? What is happening here? So I don't really like to say this is Xi Jinping's moment. Ukraine is Xi Jinping's opportunity. And he is taking full advantage of it. You are seeing Macron, you are seeing Scholz, you are going to see Sunak, you are seeing Biden, all make a beeline to hold the hand of Xi Jinping and basically, beg him to be the peacemaker in Ukraine when this is the leader who has the most to gain, who has gained the most and has the most to gain from this war and who has more than any 20 other countries combined ensured that Russia remained in this war by the financial help that is given Russia by purchase of raw materials, etc. So, what's happening in the West? Why they are doing all this? Why they are, shooting themselves in their own foot, shooting the feet of their allies? I don't know. I really can't explain this. I can explain rational behavior. I can understand that kind of behavior. This kind of irrational behavior based on emotion. And geopolitics is too serious. Strategy is too important to be done on the basis of raw emotion. It goes horribly wrong. It's going horribly wrong for the economies in Europe. It's definitely harming the economy in the US and the whole world. Why it's happening? Why Biden is smiling? I'm sorry, Joyeeta. I see no reason for him to smile at all, and for him to beg Xi Jinping, like other, the NATO leaders are coming in a long line to beg Xi Jinping, please Xi Jinping, stop Putin from this war, when Xi Jinping is the beneficiary of this war. I just don't understand it.
Okay, here something interesting that happened yesterday. The Republicans in the House, what they did, they said that we are launching an investigation into Joe Biden, his son. They accused them of corruption. They accused the Chinese of influence peddling. They accused Hunter Biden in particular of a lot of things. And the thing is that, whether this investigation goes anywhere or not, but definitely the Republicans have started making a lot of noise in terms of, quote unquote, if I can say, Joe Biden's complicity with whatever is going on, and Joe Biden's, they're putting, let me put it this way, I mean, they are putting some serious allegations against Biden and obviously his son, and also against Mr. Biden. And there is talk of financial impropriety. What do you have to say to that?
Well, I'd like to say that, financial transactions of the Biden family, I presume, will be opaque to a clear investigation. And possibly Hunter Biden has taken money from elements in the People's Republic of China. Hunter Biden is a businessman. He would, I think, accept money from any source. And China is the US's largest trading partner. No Chinese entity, frankly, until Trump turned up, has ever been sanctioned. So it could very well be that Hunter Biden and probably other members of the Biden family have profited from money received from communist China. It's quite likely. But may I point out, Joyeeta, that if you look at that, there is a particular real estate Mughal who reached a very powerful position in the election in 2016, and a lot of the apartments and property of that Mughal were purchased by Chinese interests. So that brush can hit a lot of places. But the reality is, yes, you're right. The Republicans are going to launch a campaign against Joe Biden because, frankly, the Republicans know China is not popular. It may be popular in some parts of Washington, it may be popular in some parts of Seattle or some parts of Maryland among tech billionaires who seem to adore China, but it's certainly not popular with the average American voter. And the Republicans know that. So they are going to ask Joe Biden, why on earth are you so soft on China? And I'm asking the same question. They're talking about, twice the Chinese have blocked US and India sponsored moves to basically, hold accountable some of the deadliest terrorists in the world. The Chinese have blocked it. If the United States was really serious about the global war on terror, at least the Biden administration, they would have promptly sanctioned the Chinese officials who are behind that particular bloc in the United Nations. They could have sanctioned the Chinese ambassador to the United Nations, or they could have sanctioned whoever in China they found to be responsible for that decision to basically allow terrorists free run and not get them sanctioned, internationally sanctioned. The United States has been shamed by China's refusal to allow sanctions, but the United States is doing nothing about it. They're not sanctioning anybody from China. They're sanctioning Russians by the dozen. They're sanctioning people in other countries by the hundreds. They're not sanctioning people in China, and they're not sanctioning people in Pakistan. So how serious are they? I don't know. I would like to believe the best about Joe Biden. I don't believe he's a crooked man. I don't know if I can say that for all his extended family and friends, but certainly Joe Biden is a decent individual. Jill Biden is a very, if I may say so, upright person. But the reality is, I can tell you, that it's very unfortunate that US policy under Biden has become, if I may say so, so contradictory to the realities of Cold War 2.0, which is something which Biden denies, by the way. I don't know if any US president could have survived in the US by saying, oh, the Soviet Union is not a rival. The Soviet Union is really a good friend of the United States. I don't think so. Frankly, Joe Biden hasn't got the memo that US voters are not going to forgive what are called panda huggers, those who basically blindly support the Communist Party of China. And unfortunately, the optics are turning out that poor Joe Biden is being characterized as a panda hugger. If he stands in 2024, he's the one candidate that Trump can defeat. There's no question about it. But I don't think the Democrats are going to want to commit collective, harakiri by getting him to stand. But the reality is, frankly, Biden is coming across exactly what the Republicans allege of him, in my view, not correctly, that he is in the pay of China, which I don't think is true at all, frankly. But he's coming across that. The circumstantial evidence, unfortunately, is pointing to that. And that's very unfortunate. It's unfortunate for the United States. It's unfortunate for friends of the United States such as India. It's very unfortunate for the ruling party in Taiwan, because now Taiwanese are going to say, my God, the ruling party has told us that America is with us in this war. Japan is with us in this war. Now Japan under Kishida has also made a beeline for Xi Jinping. Biden has sprinted towards Xi Jinping. So what is this party talking about? My own belief is it has definitely damaged the prospects of the DPP in the elections in Taiwan, and that's one more reason why Xi Jinping can smile.
Yes. Okay, now when we are talking about Biden and the shift, I mean, pro-China shift that we saw this week, can it also be a legacy thing for him in terms of policy? If we are looking at, if we look back at, say, what Barack Obama was doing at that time, Barack Obama, if you remember, he did not lift a finger when China created trouble with Philippines over the Scarborough, that the shoals and all. From that time onwards, the US started giving out the message that it was not interested in, forget about containing China. They were actually hoping that by mainstreaming China, they would kind of, China will be humanized. Do you think the same kind of thought is also, that could be considering Biden is a holdover from that period, that also could be motivating him towards it, considering also if you see Janet Yellen's recent statement that there are going to now trade ties will be revived between US and China. Do you think it could be also a more of a policy thing, of a hangover from the past?
Well, I'd like to say that Barack Obama in his first term, when he was dominated by the Clintonites in his administration and by Hillary Clinton herself, was a different person from Barack Obama in his second term. In his second term, he understood much more, or he acted much more in terms of Cold War 2.0. The fundamental point, the fundamental fault line is those who are still stuck in the time warp of Cold War 1.0 and those who have moved on to the present era, which is the era of Cold War 2.0. Barack Obama did move towards that in his second term. He did try and make an opening in the Indo-Pacific. You recall he had some very clear and warm conversations with Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, Scott Morrison. I mean, these two leaders definitely. But Trump, of course, I mean, a bit of a zigzagger, but Trump knew where the American public was going, and he played to that. And he knew there was an anti-Communist Party of China move. And it was clear by Xi Jinping. The good thing about him is completely transparent. China wants to run the world. Absolutely transparent about it. And China believes America was running the world. It knows America is not running the world now. So the British ran the world. The Spanish ran the world. Chinese communists in their schools have studied the history of Spanish colonialism, Portuguese colonialism, British colonialism, French colonialism, Dutch colonialism, every kind of colonialism. And for them, what they want is to run the world, and now Xi Jinping is open about it. So that being the case, you are seeing an increasing feeling in the democracies, including in India, if I may point out, which is wary of China and wary of those leaders who don't seem to understand that we are in Cold War 2.0. It's as much an existential conflict as Cold War 1.0. Either the Soviet system would have collapsed, or, I mean, what we can call the American system would have collapsed. The Soviet system collapsed. Today, either the authoritarian model that is, basically championed by Xi Jinping will collapse, or the more flexible democratic model which is there in the democracies will collapse. Now, unfortunately, that particular memo, is not very visible in the actions of Joe Biden, if I may say so, because he is a complete Cold Warrior 1.0 man. And, I don't blame him. You have Blinken, you have Sullivan. These are all people who are basically, who believe that there's one European continent. on both sides of the Atlantic, separated by the North Atlantic Ocean. We're all Europeans together, quote unquote. As Gorbachev thought, Russians also are Europeans, poor chap. Yeltsin thought that, for some time Putin thought that. They're Blinken, Biden, Sullivan, they're basically what I call Europeanists. For them, the only continent that really counts is Europe, which means the primacy of attention to Europe. And Russia is basically their excuse for shifting primacy from Asia to Europe, from the Indo-Pacific back to the Atlantic. They're all born Europeanists, and unfortunately they haven't grown up in their strategic thinking.
But at the same time, when you are talking about, we are talking about Biden as being very pro-China, how do we say, but he at the same time, he is also the man who has imposed this export ban of semiconductors and high-tech equipment to China, which is really going to hurt China's semiconductor industry. So China is also rattled about that, and he also has not been able to remove the tariffs that Donald Trump had imposed on China. How do you explain this?
Look, I'd like to say about that, the United States is not China, Joyeeta. In China, I mean, whenever I've gone there, I would like to say they've been very hospitable to me and to my wife Lakshmi. And I must say, overall, I've always been a great admirer of Chinese culture and civilization, all 5,000 years of it. And I would like to say, I have several good friends among the Chinese people, including in communist China. It's a different matter that my strategic vision and theirs do not align at all. I used to make it plain to them that the way they are going, India would have to get closer to the United States and will be getting more and more distant from China because of the mistakes that China was making in the subcontinent and elsewhere. But having said that, I'd like to say that if you go back to the United States, for example, the reality of situation is that today, Biden is basically harming his party severely by this outreach to China. And the chip ban was a very, very good stroke, a master stroke. Let me tell you, it was not Biden. I have since then researched the matter. Initially, I also jumped to a conclusion, he's the president, he signs finally. But the United States president is not the final authority. You have the legislature, you have the Senate, the House, you have corporates, you've got universities, academics and think tanks. Academics and think tanks have much more influence in the US and China than they do in India, I can tell you that. But it was basically the Department of Defense mainly that pushed through this legislation. Why? Because those chips are deadlier than bullets when it comes to a future conflict, which is more or less looking very likely, if not inevitable. The Defense Department knows that. Soldiers in the department, allies, the lives of allied soldiers will be killed because of the chips that the United States has been freely handing out like potato wafers to the Chinese, the technology, the chips. So it was the DOD, the Department of Defense, which, by the way, unlike State Department, understands the value of India and is really keen on a good India-US relationship. It was the DOD, frankly, that ensured that Biden signed that chip ban. I don't think he was happy about signing it at all. And if these tariffs are removed, the Trump tariffs are actually very minor tariffs. Very few tariffs, relatively minor compared to what China has been doing in its dumping and various other activities, scooping out manufacturers and scooping out. The Chinese send delegations to different companies, to different countries. They identify the products that they can produce. They identify the price at which they can outsell domestic manufacturers in India, in the United States, in UK, etc. And then what they do, they produce those products, alternative products, and they basically scoop out these industries so that they have to shut down. They try and
Yes.
they have tried and succeeded in deindustrializing much of the US. To some extent, they have succeeded in shutting down many Indian industries and replacing it with their own exports, which have reached very, very high levels. The trade balance in their favor has reached very high levels. So they are good at doing this kind of thing. So the DOD, I think, was behind that chip ban, but it's a very essential step in ensuring that China does not win a future war, because those chips are basically going to be the most important component of any future war.
Okay, I think we are running out of time. A quick last question. It is like, considering at a time when there is the State Department and White House, which is definitely seeming to be tilting towards China and perhaps even Treasury, what exactly will India, what kind of a path should India be taking, given China is such an existential crisis at times for India?
Look, I'd like to say very clearly that this is India's moment. The Chinese in the 1980s took great benefit from the problems that occurred between the USSR and the United States. Today, whether Biden and the entire family of Biden, everybody loves China. I don't know. I don't believe that's true. Certainly, I don't believe poor Biden and Mrs. Biden do. But whatever that, the reality of the situation is that the relationship between the United States and China is going downhill and will continue to go downhill. Dear Mr. Blinken can fly 100 times to Beijing. Both Blinken and Sullivan, frankly, if you check their travel schedules over the last 25 years or so, it's mostly almost entirely to Europe. They don't believe they have to go anywhere outside Europe to get gyan, wisdom. Indian, oh my God, of course not. Africa, of course not. Latin America, no. It's only Europe which has got wisdom, because they are, in a sense, what I say, Europeanized Americans. Like Hillary Clinton. I mean, they're not really American. At least Trump was American. George Bush is American. Obama is American. I mean, Biden, poor chap, he's mildly Europeanized. He's not entirely Europeanized, but he's mildly Europeanized. And this is the bane of US policy, that you have people there who are still stuck in the belief that North America and Europe are two parts of the same continent separated by the waters of the North Atlantic. That is the problem. But the reality is, the cold, hard facts of Cold War 2.0 mean that if India acts, in the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's words, acts that it is aware of the China threat, that it is basically with those who are resisting the China threat, it will resist pressure and blandishments from China to try and dilute its policies in the way that some people in Biden's administration seem to be trying to do. Well, I can tell you, if we distinguish ourselves clearly as the essential factor in Cold War 2.0, just as China was the essential factor in Cold War 1.0, we will get the benefit of that. What in Latin is called the tertius cordons, the golden middle person, the golden third person. Two people fight, the third person benefits. The US and China are going to be locked in conflict, and India is the third country that can benefit. But for that, we have to act that we know the situation, and we have to act that we know the importance of democracies and fighting with democracies. PM Modi and Shinzo Abe did that by their strong advocacy of the Quad, and I can assure you that kind of differentiation is what is ensuring that so much of investment has started now looking at India. By 23, 24, we're going to see a lot of that investment come to India, provided the signaling in India is right.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Sorry, we have totally run out of time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to learn so much from you. Thank you once again, Professor Nalapat, and thank you viewers for watching this show. Until the next time.